All right. Shh. Welcome back. Welcome back. Please sign into the attendance on your app, please. We are really just about almost at the end of the class. These one-day-week classes feel so strange because you don't have the same sort of continuity, but we only have a handful of classes left. We're doing free exercise tonight. The week after, we do the establishment clause. On the 22nd, we do more on establishment. I'm sorry, on the 22nd, we do establishment clause. And then on the last day of class, the 29th, I will do not the First Amendment, but another amendment, the Second Amendment, which I don't think you ever learn in law school. Then maybe just a few minutes, we'll give a good discussion of the right to keep and bear arms. It doesn't fit anywhere else, but so be it. And just an update. I think I told you this last year, but we're considering revising our curriculum in many regards. And whatever I told you last semester may be obsolete by now. But I think where we're headed, I don't know, we'll take a vote on, I think, Friday or maybe next month, I can't remember, is that there'll be at least a change to con law such that I think this class will very likely become required. Not necessarily, but probably. And the complication is whenever you require one class, that diminishes the electives you can take. So it's always this very strange trade-off, right? You want people to have well-rounded education, but by mandating this class or that class, you make it more difficult for students to choose the elective that they best fit in. So I go back and forth. I like this class. I think it's important. I'm not sure if I'd require it, but the vote's not my vote. I think that's where we're going. So you took it now, which is good, and maybe I'll teach it again next semester for people not so willing to take it. The downside is you'll want to be here. If it becomes a required class, now 80 people in here, and it's a much less personal experience. So I go back and forth. Pros and cons. Okay, so any questions on the class? I barely even mentioned the exam. My goodness, you should get questions about it all the time, but your exam is going to be in class. If you haven't before, you know the routine. It's open book. You can bring whatever you want. It will not help you, especially in this class. It really won't help you. You know, you can bring your Constitution. The First Amendment fits on one page. You know, that might help you a little bit, but that's about all you have. It's going to be the same format as before. Essay questions. There'll be 2 questions. Each question the 1,000 word limit. There'll be one question set in the present day. That is 2019. Yeah, 2019. If you remember the year. I give the same spiel every year. You have to update the year. 2019, and then another question set at some point in the past. The reason why I ask the second type of question is to see how you can trace the development of doctrine. You know, for example, free speech case looked a lot different during World War I than it did during the 1960s than it does during today, right? You'll see some changes in how they've approached, for example, the Scherber test, and then you have Smith, and then you have RFRA. So there are different ways that I can test this to see if you understand the development of the doctrine. It'll be fun. No, it won't. I haven't written the question yet, so I have no idea what it's going to be. But I usually write it after the last day of class because I'm a terrible liar. I give stuff away. Yeah, John?
Is it going to be restricted to just cases from this
Yes.
class in this
Yeah.
semester?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the only exception is like Bernie v. Flores, which I mentioned last week. But I was primarily concerned with free exercise stuff. I'm not going to ask you about Section 5. That's long in the past. A couple of you were asking me about that. You don't need to talk about congruence, proportionality. That's from last year or last semester, whenever you had me. Yeah.
We will have 3 hours. Even though
3 hours, yeah.
2 hours. Okay.
I'm like 99% sure of that, but yeah. You know, actually, if you want to check with the registrar on that one, if anyone would want to just go, I'm like 99% sure. They actually answer your questions quicker than mine. Is it 3? The exam's 3 hours? No, I can't. No. They're actually very stringent on this. So just FYI, I wanted to do a take-home exam. They wouldn't let me. I know. This is not my problem. There's a rule in the school, and I don't like it, but it's a rule which I have to follow, is that if a class has any sort of bar material on it, which this happens to be a class, then you require an in-class exam. Even for an elective, upper level. I don't know why I don't like it. I actually asked the registrar, which I want you to go check. I asked the registrar about the take-home early this semester. She's like, no, you can't do that. I'm like, okay, fine. Actually, my first week of teaching, I got in trouble. I was teaching property my first semester, and I told the students, yeah, we'll have a take-home exam. They're like, oh my God, that's awesome. And then I got yelled at, no, you can't do that for property. I'm like, fine. It would have been a 24-hour take-home exam, as much time as you want. I had those in law school. They were great. You'd stay up all night on them. They were not easier. But you think they're easier until you actually have to work 24 hours straight. And it's like, oh my God, this is awful. But anyway, so beyond my control. Any other questions? Okay. Oh yeah, Roxy.
The exam is 3 hours.
Thank you. Yeah, so 3 hours, 6 till 9, whatever that's the standard time slot. And there you go. Okay. Anything else? All right, let's go on to our material for today. Last class we talked about the free exercise clause. And we had these two major precedents, right? We had Sherbert, which gave rise to the Sherbert test. And the Sherbert test basically said when a law burdens the free exercise of religion, you apply what's basically amounts of strict scrutiny. That the government needs to show a compelling interest, and you show a lot of narrow tailoring. And they framed it different ways over the years. But then we get to Justice Scalia in Smith. And he took a different direction. And whether you can reconcile Smith with Sherbert, I don't need to argue that now. But there was definitely a different direction they took. And what the court said is, when you have a law that burdens free exercise, we ask a couple questions, right? Is this law one of general applicability, right? Is it neutral, right? Did the government target one faith, or is it a general law that happens to burden one faith in particular, right? If the law is generally applicable, then you give it what's effectively a rational basis review. You don't scrutinize it carefully. This government doesn't have to have a compelling interest. They don't have to show a lot of narrow tailoring. But what if it's not neutral, right? What if it's not generally applicable? And by the way, neutral and generally applicable are different things. For the life of me, I don't know what the difference is. Randy had this argument last week. I still don't. Like, I read Kennedy, and I'm just like, what the hell are you talking about? Right? I'll teach you what I think he's trying to say, but neutrality and general applicability, in my mind, are really similar. Justice Kennedy said they're different, but they're related. Thank you, Justice Kennedy. I am grateful. I will never have to add another Kennedy opinion. It's actually, like, when Scalia died, I had this sadness, like, oh my God, I have no more Scalia opinions to edit. And when Kennedy retired, I'm like, oh great, no more Kennedy opinions to edit. It's done. They're gone. Not so the Roberts opinions, but you know. I actually had a dream last night, this is crazy, that Chief Justice Roberts wrote me a handwritten letter explaining one of his opinions, like apologizing for something. I'm like, okay. It said, Dear Josh. And it was like handwritten. I'm like, okay, that's really nice. Thank you. In my dreams. It was something Obamacare. I couldn't remember what it was, but he was explaining something that he did to me, like why he did what he did. I'm like, oh, okay, thanks. Anyway, so going back to the issue, right? You have neutrality and general applicability. The cases today take a different direction, right? The three decisions today are not laws that were neutral. They're not really laws that were generally applicable, right? They're laws that had an effect on religion in a very obvious way, okay? In the first case, you have Church the Lukumi, right? And I think we'll agree the court found that this was a law that was not designed to be neutral. It was designed to target one faith and one faith alone. And then you have Trinity Lutheran Church v. Comer, which is sort of a different case, but the laws of the state basically said, we'll give this grant to basically anyone except for a church, right? Anyone else can get, but not a church. And then you have the last case, right, which is not a constitutional decision. It's based on RFRA, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, Hobby Lobby, where you have a law that seems to say, oh yeah, all employers have to provide certain kinds of contraception coverage. Some religious groups get an accommodation, but other religious groups, for-profit corporations, do not. So these all involve, to varying degrees, the government treating religious groups differently among and each other. And the question is whether these distinctions are supported by law. Okay, any questions so far? All right, so let's start with the first case, and I think I'll drill down in the first one. The first one, there's a lot going on. Who's next? Yeah, thank you. All right, you want to give me the facts, please? And I'm not going to pronounce this correctly. I'm going to say it, and I'm pretty sure I'm saying it wrong. But the church, the Lukumi Bablu Aye versus the city of Hialeah. And I actually, years ago, I emailed I don't know what his title is, but the head of this church, and he actually replied. And like I was going out to Florida, I was like, oh, I'll go visit him. I never actually did, but I actually did correspond with the head of this group in Florida. I should have. I just never did. Okay, go give us the facts, please.
Yes. So this is a church based on the Santeria religion. And so they were looking to move into looking to build a church in a city, and in the process of them trying to go through the permitting process, the inspections, all the zoning applications and all of that, kind of word got out to the community that this new church was moving in, and that caused a lot of concern, and so that prompted city council to have kind of an emergency session where they immediately enacted a couple resolutions and city ordinances, one being the public morals, peace, and safety, that they had a concern about that, and then the other was animal cruelty kind of law. And so those were immediately enacted. And then a couple months later, in September, the city council then adopted several more city ordinances.
There were a lot.
Each like defining out what slaughter is, what animal cruelty, sacrifice, and those were all kind of targeted at this one church.
Okay, good. Thank you so much. So let's walk through this one step at a time, right? Has anyone ever been involved in city government, local government? Okay, so I'll call you just for a minute. Does city government usually move fast, expeditiously, like efficiently? Like if there's a pothole in your block, right? Maybe it'll get fixed like in 5 years, right? Maybe not really. I think we all agree that a general characteristic of city government is it's not very efficient, right? It moves at a slow pace, right? People are mostly volunteers, right? Maybe they're paid very little. To be elected officials, it's a part-time job. They handle things, at their own pace. And generally for local government, that's good enough, right? It's rare that local government has any sort of crisis. But when local government has a crisis, oh man, do they act fast. Do they act fast? A couple of you in my Property 2 class, do you remember a case, it was a zoning case where it was from Pennsylvania, where a company wanted to open up an adult bookstore. Remember this case? Yeah. Moon Township, Pennsylvania, if I remember correctly. And basically, like, the city council got word that someone wanted to open up an adult bookstore. They sell pornography, right? Before the internet, that's how you get it. You go to a bookstore. What's that?
It's Vesta's favorite case.
It's Vesta's favorite case?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay. So you have this case, and the city council finds out, oh my God, they're opening a bookstore. So they pass these ordinances saying, okay, you can't have any adult bookstore within, 500 feet of a school or a playground or any sort of residential neighborhood, right? Which basically makes that location they built illegal. You can't keep it there. So then they have to say whether they can shut it down. But the point is, when local government finds something that they consider bad, they act quick. I had one case when I was clerking, I think I told you, where a group wanted to open a methadone clinic. This was like for opiate treatment. And then within like a week of this place being announced, they passed an ordinance saying you can't build any opioid clinics like inside city limits. And they said, oh, you can't build it near a park. And they designated the grass in front of this place as a park, right? But they move quick, right? So we have here, I think Jesse gives the facts well. I said Jessica, sorry. I once had two students with the same name sat next to each other. There was two guys and two girls, and they both had the same name. Two guys the same name, two girls the same name.
I would be Jessica and she would be Jessie.
What do you usually go by?
Jessica.
And?
Yeah.
Oh, that'd be actually easier if it was both Jessica, fewer names to remember. Okay, so, but the point is, government moves quickly. And if there's anything in the world to make Justice Kennedy angry, it's when governments move quickly to pass laws targeting specific groups. Think of like Romer v. Evans, the Colorado case with the Amendment 2, and for gay rights. Okay? But I want to just take a step back, and I want to offer a qualified defense of the city of Hialeah. Right? I'm not defending them, but offer a qualified defense, right? What if there was actually a valid reason to enact this ordinance, right? And let's just let the cat out of the bag, poor choice of words. This group performs animal sacrifices, right? I'm not going to show you pictures of it because people will get very upset. I was actually making the video for this case, and my goodness, I couldn't put any pictures into it because every picture was of a bloody animal. I was like, I can't do this to my students. It just like I had to be like careful. When I took the Stevens case, the Crush film case, I can't make that video with any pictures. People will lose it. Like I anyway. But this group performs animal sacrifices, and let me just read to you the lawyer for the city. This is what he said to Supreme Court. I'll just read you this quote. He said, "Animals are being, in effect, tortured in Hialeah and subjected to cruel treatment in the form of possession prior to sacrifice." I'll keep reading. This is from the lawyer from the city. "When sacrifices took place, as many as 52 animals in a single day are killed, and they were killed in a private residence in many instances. And then they were decapitated. Blood is put into pots, and the animals are oftentimes left out in public places." Okay, and I'll just read you that one bit. You can imagine that there might be a public health problem, right? With people sacrificing 50 animals in a day, putting the blood in a pot, and then leaving that outside on the stoop for collection of garbage in the hot Florida sun, right? I'm putting religion aside for me. I just want to actually get to the meat. Oh boy, the core of the issue, right? If you're the city, right, Kyle, just calling you for a minute, right? If you're the city and you've never had this problem before, this thing just pops up, and you're afraid of the sanitation issues that might arise from this sort of practice, which again is new, you haven't dealt with this before. How might you go about this new sanitary issue? Everyone agrees it's a problem. There's like bloody carcasses sitting in a garbage can at the stoop, right? I think we all agree at least that much. So how might you go about handling this issue?
So you should target the actual conduct that you're trying to prohibit as opposed to the religious practices that are associated with that conduct.
Okay, so what would that look like?
You would say, like, if you want to, slaughter a chicken, then you have to, like, have prearranged plans of where you're going to dispose of it, and it has to be approved. It has to be approved facility or something like that. Or you can only slaughter chickens in these places where we have special sinks. I have no idea.
You know what this sounds like? What case does it sound like? My goodness. Oh, come on. It's in the name of the case.
Oh.
No, not check the poultry. Actually, no, another case I'm thinking of. Slaughterhouse case, right? What was the slaughterhouse case, right? Go back to the 1860s. New Orleans said you can only slaughter livestock in one central facility with sanitation, right? With clean. So basically, could the city have just said, Kyle, we're going to restrict the slaughtering of these animals to licensed, I don't know what you would call them, licensed slaughtering facilities?
Sure. Or like.
But, okay, now I'll come back at you. Come at me, bro. Right? Where do these individuals want to perform the slaughter? In some
At the
sterile
church.
facility or at their church?
At their church. So that's what I was gonna say.
Okay.
They should, if they're obviously they're targeting this particular church, they should just require, as part of the building permit or whatever, that they have sanitary facilities installed in that church.
Okay. I'm going to come back one more at you, okay? Because it's not deliberate, but because you raised another one, right? Having a sanitary facility, stainless steel counters, drains on the floor, right? Hoses coming down from the ceiling, right? You've been to a Solaris, it's not pretty.
Mm-hmm.
Would you really make a church install these sorts of industrial grade, like, things inside their house of worship?
Yeah, I mean, they could be in a separate room or whatever, but what is your alternative? Just throwing the chicken out back?
I don't know, Whit. I think you're actually next. I'm calling you Whit. So what's your solution, right? We have this sanitary issue. We all agree it's bad to have these chicken carcasses sitting on the curb in the 90-degree sun. What was the city supposed to do?
They could donate the food.
Well, they could donate the food, but that wouldn't solve the problem of having these pots full of blood sitting on the curb.
Could I ask, though, like, why would you not require, like, what would be bad about requiring a church to do that if they're going to be engaging in that?
Oh, so you think there's nothing wrong with it, that you can ask a church to undergo the installation of industrial grade drains on the floor, hoses, stainless steel counters.
When you have churches that feed facility or have like food facilities in general, they have to meet state standards. They have to have stainless steel food covering.
Well, you're asking for a different one, right? You're asking about whether, and I think it's an important question, could you make the church pay for these additional services? I'll just put one question back to it. What if the nature of their ritual means that they have to do it in their house of worship, which they designed according to the dictates of their faith, and they can't have a stainless steel counter? It has to be done on maybe some sort of a ritual altar, and then maybe they need to dispose of this blood in certain types of jars and not like industrial grade whatever. What if that's the tenet of their faith?
Yeah, then I would say if under those facts, it would be much harder to establish a law like this, because then the government interest would have to be much higher. They'd have to connect it to some kind of disease that was spreading and actually killing a lot of people. They don't have anything
But why does this,
here.
why can't this be a law of general applicability? Why can't they just, in other words, what kind of law would work in this case that would serve the government's interest but have the least burden on faith? Colby?
Well, here, when you look at the face of these ordinances, they're specifically targeting the church.
No, I get that. But what would you do? What could you have done that would have passed muster? That would have been okay?
Broaden the language and prevent people like hunters and other people who kill animals from coming into the city and dropping the carcasses off and that type of
But
stuff.
what if there really wasn't a problem with hunters? What if hunters, kill their animals in the woods, they brought them back maybe one or two at a time? Here you have 50 slaughters in a day. What if, the problem at issue, and see what I'm getting at, right? And just again, bear with me. The actual problem here was caused only by this religion, right? The actual sanitary issue, arguably, was only caused by this one faith. If that was the case, then why are you punishing hunters who don't contribute to this sort of problem?
Still, it would make it a general applicable law if they did that.
Marissa, what would an ideal law look like that would have worked better, that would have passed constitutional muster in this case?
When in the law it specifically says sacrifice, which isn't necessarily directed towards them, but it does.
So they screwed up their language, huh? So what if they would cut the word sacrifice, said slaughter instead? Would that have been better?
Well, there wouldn't be as anything to go off of that would indicate that that's why they're passing the law.
Christine, what do you think? How could they have done this better? What could the city have done differently?
What she said, just make it more broad.
But let's say they cut the word sacrifice out of the statute, right? They cut the word sacrifice out. Could they still then ban the slaughtering of chickens if it's not going to be used for consumption of food? Or could they require the installation of surgical grade steel counters to sterilize the animals? Like, could you do that? Oh man, that's a good question.
I don't think that.
One second, just, you know what?
Yeah.
I don't think your consumption solves the problem because in most of the rights they eat the food, they eat the animal. So consumption, I don't think it solves your problem.
Gabe?
The way I was thinking is when we wrote the law, like you mentioned earlier, instead of using sacrifice, we use slaughter.
Yeah.
But what I was thinking is, the problem was they were leaving the dead animals in the street, right?
Uh-huh.
They were not limited to the day that trash comes and picks it up. Like Monday River, they come twice a week, right?
Uh-huh.
So we're not limited to the day the truck comes and picks up, the dead animals. And on top of that, use like containers where they can, put the blood in or
So what you're
research
saying
about-
is instead of regulating the slaughter itself, you regulate the
only the specific
the
day that trash-
disposal. Ah, okay. So I think now we're getting there, right? Couldn't the government have just had a law that regulates how these issues, how these things are disposed of after the slaughter? In other words, let them kill the animal however they see fit, but once it's dead and their ritual is completed, when it goes to the curb, it's got to be put in maybe a container that's sealed. Maybe the church has to pay for a same-day pickup for trash. Maybe they have to haul it themselves to a local facility. Maybe they bury it. I don't know, right? So what I'm getting at is, putting aside the issue of targeting, we'll get there in a minute, the government could have achieved their exact same interest without banning the slaughter, right? But now let me take a step back and ask a question, right? What if they said, by the time the animal's killed, it's too late. We don't trust these people to actually dispose of it correctly. We're going to just ban it at the root. We're going to ban the procedure altogether.
Oh, I had a different question.
All right, ask your question.
Okay. I think you'd get into before then about an issue with roadkill.
Tell me about roadkill.
Like when you hit an animal while you're driving,
Okay.
and then if you just leave it there.
Are we supposed to pick it up? I've never hit it. I don't.
I mean,
I ran over a cat once when I started driving when I was 17. I was very sad about that.
I mean, so I think when you
I heard this bump.
You get a lot of people who are like they're incidentally killing an animal, but then they're getting caught under this law and everything, and they're going. There's a lot of.
Okay. Who else? Who else had a hand? Well, let's share my question, right? What if the state says it's not enough to simply regulate the disposal because we're not confident that they'll actually comply with this, right? Maybe we can fine them, whatever, but they're not going to pay the fine, right? We know these people have no money. What if we say the only way to prevent this from happening is to stop the slaughtering altogether? Because if we stop the slaughtering altogether, then we have to worry about disposal. It's a much more neat and easy way. Well,
I think it's kind of preemptive
yeah.
to suppose that they're gonna not follow through with the.
What about the slaughterhouse case, right? We know in the Privileged Immunities Clause that New Orleans can just shut down private butchering and make everyone butcher in this one place. Why should the Church of Lukumi get a privilege that the slaughterhouse butchers don't get? Why are these church people getting this privilege that the butchers in New Orleans don't get?
The city could just pass some words, can't kill animals in the city.
Can't kill any animals in city limits, right? They could do that. I saw a hand somewhere here. Yeah, Carlos.
So wouldn't that be overreaching and would be more than what's necessary to achieve their?
So it's not narrowly tailored enough, you want to use that word. Yeah, Lance.
Isn't like slaughterhouses like run for like a business and?
Is there a difference between a church and a business?
Yeah, I mean, shouldn't the church be afforded like greater protection?
Why?
Because it's not like, commercial.
So what?
More like a free speech thing.
Commercial speech, I see what you're getting at. Whit?
To me, it seemed like the court was not very concerned with the actual language of the law, other than in the resolution it talked about at the beginning, 86, 766, which just said concern expressed by the residents of the city that certain religions rather may propose to engage in practices, and goes on to describe essentially the slaughtering of these animals in a sacrificial manner, and they just lashed on that and then kind of used subsidiary facts and reviewed those and said, like, this is obviously targeted, and if you just change the language, I know you were asking us that earlier, so I didn't know. I mean, if they just changed that language, just took that off,
It would okay.
just be neutral enough.
So I mean, really, you're punishing the idiot who drafted that ordinance the way he did. Had they just been quiet about what they wanted to do, been fine. So let me put another question out here, right? Let's say that their concern wasn't just about disposal of blood, right? Let's say that this town was very concerned about animal cruelty. Right? Think of the Stevens case, the Crush Films case. They said, you know what? We've witnessed these rituals, right? We respect this religion, but their religion involves torturing, and it says this in the transcript, torturing animals, decapitating animals, so that the animal feels a lot of pain. And the city just says, we do not want the torturing of animals, even for religious practices. Does that change the answer? I think I'll answer next. Does that change the answer? For saying we've determined under our police power that this is torture. And we forgetting disposal, we don't even want these animals being tortured, right? Your religion does not give you the right to torture little animals. What then?
Yeah, I mean, I think that changed things. I mean, that was one of the interests that they asserted.
They did assert that, didn't they? But would that be enough? Because then the disposal thing doesn't matter, right? If you limit it to the torture aspect, then the disposal remedies are irrelevant. Then all that would matter is that you're stopping the torture in the first place.
Yeah, but that would have to apply to everybody.
Okay. Okay, so, you know, you could frame the statute, if you kill an animal in a, I don't know if hunters here, I wouldn't know how to phrase this, but in a way that's designed, or in the non-least painful way. I don't know how it could that even be phrased? I'm not a hunter.
General animal cruelty law. I mean, if you subject an animal to intentional pain and suffering.
Is shooting it to intentional pain and suffering, or do you put it if it's misery quickly? I don't hunt. I don't know.
If you're just hunting in general and say you miss your mark, then you go and take it out of its misery. I mean,
you take it out right away. So if let's say if you shoot in its leg or something.
Yeah.
Gut.
You shoot in the gut.
Yeah, gut.
Yeah, Dana. I'm sorry? Aha! So as a bright line rule, you just ban it altogether. Or what if you say, let's be different. We say we think the hunters are generally pretty good. They put their animals with their misery, but these people, the Santeria, the entire focus is to decapitate the animal, right? That the entire ritual is itself not perhaps intended to inflict pain, but will inflict pain. And because we think these are the people we have to target, we're targeting them, right? Okay, what do you think? Would that be an easy way to administer it? Because these are the people who are screwing up, right? The hunters were okay with it. They know how to handle things, more or less, right?
Yeah, so don't know, I mean, are you going to have government officials at the rituals?
Oh boy, that was like 3 questions down the road, but yeah. How the hell do you enforce this? Do you actually send officers into the house of worship while they're engaging in the ritual, bang on the door, take the chickens away into custody, right? I don't laugh, but the question of administrability and how you actually enforce this thing is not a joke. We discussed the concept of entanglement, right? To entangle with religion. And that goes back to Kyle's point a minute ago. Are you actually going to make government worshipers go to like a sterile facility and pray there and do their ritual there? Under the eye of a government official who say, okay, you can put this chicken here, put that cow there, put that guinea pig here.
They're so into not doing it in city limits.
So you just ban it within city limits. They have to go to the country to engage in their worship.
A lot of stuff happens out in the country that.
With animals and chicken. Oh God. Yeah. Oh boy.
What about like exterminators? What about you know?
I think cruelty laws generally have exceptions for pests and vermin.
So pests, draw the line for like raccoons. What if you have an outward cat problem in the neighborhood? What if you have, there's multiple cities that are kill shelter cities. That, when they have an influx of dogs or pets that they don't have room to care for,
And generally, I think they euthanize them to have painless death. It's not decapitation. Yeah,
So if they just like followed federal laws
Well, federal of what? I didn't hear what you said.
If you, before you euthanize them, you knock them out. I mean, is that,
Oh, that's my next question. Good. So let's say a state passes a law. Okay, so kosher, right? I'm Jewish. I don't eat kosher meat, but I've eaten it before, right? Under the laws of what's called kosher, there are certain ways to slaughter an animal, right? It's actually designed to minimize the pain to the animal. So for example, you're supposed to slice the neck with a knife, with a very sharp blade, with no nicks on it. And the idea is to basically bleed out immediately. These are 1,000-year-old rules, but they're designed to make the animal feel as little pain as possible, right? It's a dietary code. There are countries in Europe that have banned this type of slaughter. They say you need to use a stun gun, not knock them over the head, right? But same idea, right? Use a stun gun, you zap the animal, and then when they're sedated, then you slaughter them. This stun gun thing would go against the tradition of Judaism. It's inflicting additional pain. It's one extra thing they have to do to the animal. Right? Does making people slaughter animals in a certain way then violate the free exercise of religion? And I'm going to take it one step further. Let's say the butcher who slaughters these animals is not a sole proprietorship. Most butchers are incorporated. I think most butchers around the world are incorporated. Can that corporation, which sells meat, not rely on the free exercise of religion? I was going to do this for Hobby Lobby, but I might as well do it now. Not easy questions, right? Let me give you one more example. I actually worked on this case. Again, it seems a pattern, Jewish case. There's a Jewish tradition on the Day of Atonement called Coppa. It's weird. It's weird. You basically take a chicken and you sort of wave it over your head, right? It's a weird ritual, right? And then you basically you kill the chicken in the manner consistent with kosher rules. It looks weird. I'm not going to describe it for you, but it looks weird. In California, you have poultry activists who filed a lawsuit against a synagogue, a Jewish house of worship, arguing that this ritual violates animal cruelty laws, was an unfair practice, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not getting into the facts of the case because the case was a disaster from the beginning. But the way it works is you basically swing the chicken over your head, then you slaughter it. Not all Jews do that, right? Some Jews will just take a bag of coins and swing that over your head instead of the chicken. There are different rituals. And I was actually an amicus in this case, and I was participating in the oral arguments for this case. And the judge asked a question. He said, well, why can't the Jews substitute the chicken for the money? He said, if other Jews use this money thing, why can't your clients get rid of the chickens? And the judge also asked, to Kyle's point, well, why can't they just do this ritual in a slaughter facility, not in their house of worship? And I was knowing about Lukumi, I'm like, okay, this guy needs to do his homework, this judge. And oh man, I wrote an op-ed about him in the LA Times. It was bad. It was brutal. And it was pretty harsh. But the sorts of questions he's asking, I think, are inconsistent with a lot of precedent. Whereas a general matter, the state tries really hard not to dictate how a religious group exercises the tenets of their religion. Either going to a facility or having some sort of a supervisor watching them, or saying, okay, clock the chicken in the head, then you can slaughter it, right? There's a very strong preference not to dictate how people do it, which is why I think this case was so easy for the court. It was unanimous. It was telling them you can't engage in this ritual of slaughter. Had they just regulated the disposal of the chickens and the blood, I think this case would have been a lot harder. And I don't know if it come out the same way, right? They said you need to dispose in certain containers. That gets a lot harder, right? That might impose a burden on the religion, but I think there's less idea of targeting of them, right? Okay, I see Cameron and then Dana.
Do you think the timing of the whole thing?
Oh my God, yeah. Yeah.
Thing that they passed worked?
Yeah, I mean the sequence of events, the rapid sequence of events that led to this make it basically a given that they were going to lose. Hold on, I wrote this in my notes. I'm not sure I read it to you. right? I mean, the quickest way to get Justice Kennedy to rule against you is to have like this rapid sequence where you target this one faith. Dana?
This might be very off, but you're talking about fish customs and then disposal, and then you think about, I probably said it wrong, bris.
Oh, you talk circumcision. Yeah, we'll talk about that.
That's done in the synagogue,
Sometimes, yeah.
and don't they have to dispose of that? I mean, I guess
Some parents keep it.
my boss is Jewish, so I have all these questions.
I'm mostly joking. It's biological waste, yes. They're not talking about the umbilical cord.
No, I know. But
Oh God. I kept my daughter's umbilical cord. It's an little Ziploc. I don't know why
Essentially, right?
it fell off.
Human
It's human remains. Yeah.
remains.
But aren't there regulations on how to dispose of that? So this would be.
Yeah, maybe my little Ziploc is a felon. I'm not sure. I'll give you another one. The circumcision issue is non-trivial. There's a very a vocal group that thinks that circumcision is cruelty to children. And these are children who do not consent to this, and they say it's a necessary medical procedure. And there are some groups that are trying to pass laws that would make it a crime to circumcise a child. Would that be a law of general applicability? Is that only targeted at Jews? No, lots of people get circumcised. Muslims do. People do it for sanitary reasons. Lots of people. So, would that law, would a ban on circumcision violate Smith? Straight up ban circumcision across the board. I think under Smith that law would be okay. So I mean these are non-trivial issues. Yeah, McKinney.
Kind of going
How do we go from slaughtering animals to circumcision? God, you're just,
what a world we do live in.
yeah, right. Go.
Kind of going off what Cameron said about the sequence of events. I guess I just kind of have a hard time believing that they didn't already have a law on the books that would have addressed this, because I don't think I can leave pots of blood outside my apartment and have no one say anything about it.
Nuisance.
Yeah. Like,
Right? I mean, couldn't they have just issued a nuisance citation? Which again suggests they weren't so much interested in the disposal, they wanted to stop the ritual itself.
It seems like they kind of shot themselves in the foot.
Yeah, or cut themselves in the neck. Yeah, Cameron.
I think what a lot of this is though is when John and Jane Doe show up to the city council pissed off.
Yep.
Trying to explain, well, we'll just give nuisance. I don't think that's something that.
Yeah, I think government wants to be responsive. They wanted to enact. I mean, just think about it, right? This town probably had a lawyer, like a city attorney, whatever you want to call him, who actually drafted these ordinances. Someone actually gave this some thought. Right? Someone actually had to think of how to write these things up, not just issue a nuisance citation. And again, with the nuisance citation, it was already too late. You'd have to actually bring, I think, an injunction to to abate the nuisance, right? To actually stop the future performance of this ritual, to stop the blood, so to speak. All right. Anything else? I think we got where Morrissey wants to go. So the city here had, I think, a non-trivial interest, right? They wanted to prevent blood and carcass from sitting on the curb in the hot Florida sun, whatever, right? But the way they went about this was all problematic. So let's walk through Justice Kennedy's analysis. I think, Alec, are you next?
Yes.
All right, so, Alec, is this case governed by Smith? Again, this is 1993. Smith was, what, 1990? So a couple years after Smith, right?
Then go through it.
Okay, so walk me through Kennedy. And again, Kennedy is so muddled. He drives me insane.
Yeah,
But
so he goes through
yeah.
the two definitions of sacrifice and slaughter.
Okay.
And how they were tailored directly for religious.
Oh, but let's just talk about Smith for a minute, right? Are the ordinances neutral and generally applicable?
It says that, no.
Okay, why?
Well, they're not neutral because obviously it's,
Is it so obvious?
religious practice.
On their face, right? So on their face, I think Marissa made this point a few minutes ago. I think it was very good, right? It says sacrifice, right? That on its face is pretty straight up not neutral, right? They say sacrifice. So I think this lawyer screwed up. But let's just say for a minute that they struck out the word sacrifice, and it's facially neutral. It's just a slaughter. Would those laws then be neutral or generally applicable?
I don't think so.
Why not?
Well, it says that official action targets religious conduct, the distinctive treatment cannot be shaded by mere compliance with the required
Bingo. And this is Justice Kennedy's like most favorite thing in the world, right? He says, always in every freaking case, it's not enough to look at the face of the statute, right? You can't stop with facial neutrality. You have to also look at government hostility, right? Intent, purpose, right? And here, Justice Kennedy is willing to sort of peel back the onion, right, and look what's under the surface. And he says the choice of the word sacrifice and ritual in the ordinances, they prohibit religious groups. They had in mind the Santeria. It targets the Santeria. It was drafted to achieve this result. I mean, he has this one line. It's basically like gerrymandered, right? Or actually gerrymandered, to be precise, right? His name was Elbridge Gerry. So it's gerrymandered, but no one says it that way. When I say it in the radio, people yell at me, but it's gerrymandered. Robert said gerrymandered. I was annoyed. I thought he'd get it right, but maybe that's what he's writing me the letter about, to apologize for saying gerrymandered. This was targeted at this one faith, right? It doesn't reference hunting. It doesn't reference other types of slaughter. It's only targeted here. The government could impose restrictions on the disposal of the animals. They could prohibit animal cruelty by saying how you treat the animals, but you cannot prohibit this slaughter in this fashion. He says the pattern discloses animosity to the Santeria adherents. The text of the ordinances were gerrymandered with care to prescribe religious animal killings, but to make it okay to have hunting. This law is not neutral. It's not generally applicable. Therefore, you apply strict scrutiny. Okay. Once you get to strict scrutiny, Harrison, this case is easy, right? Why does this law flunk strict scrutiny?
Because it doesn't narrow the table.
Not at all, right? It's a piece of cake, right? We'll assume that there's a compelling state interest in sanitation. We'll just assume that. I think there probably is. But it's not narrowly tailored, right? Instead of stopping the problem, which was leaving carcasses on the sidewalk, they stopped something else which was far greater, which was actually the slaughter. So therefore, we get to strict scrutiny, and that's it. The statutes or the ordinances are unconstitutional. Okay. So any questions then on the first case? On Lukumi? Any questions on Lukumi? Right? This case was important following Smith, because the court said in Smith is we are generally going to apply a rational basis review unless the law is not neutral. And here they said, okay, we meant what we said. This law is not neutral, therefore give it strict scrutiny. All right, but just think a little bit more about the kosher examples, the chicken examples, right? Can the state make you slaughter your ritual in a certified slaughterhouse? Can they make you spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in a drainage system, right, that you might only use a couple times a year, which you probably can't afford? So Witt made a point, which I want to come back to. If you have a homeless shelter in a church, are you allowed to serve them rancid food? Right? You have to comply with all the same sanitation standards that you would if you're serving a restaurant or any other facility, right? Homeless shelters can't serve day-old food, right? They can't serve spoiled food, even though maybe people who are eating it may not care as much. You can't treat people like that. So if you can make a homeless shelter abide by food serving standards, is slaughtering standards that much different? And let me bridge this one to the next case a little bit. For many Christians who operate these shelters, the serving the food is part of their faith, right? Their faith is not limited to sitting in prayer and singing songs and taking a knee and lighting a candle. That their faith includes service, which very well will be serving the community. So is there a difference then between the prayers in the pews and the prayers in the pots? Ooh, that's good, right? I stand that up. When you're serving, right? Is there actually different? This is actually Sotomayor's dissent, right? In the Comer case, she said there's no difference between the prayers in the pews and the prayers in the playground. Your hand was up?
So I know that they already do, because I was listening to NPR the other day, I know they already do like regulate circumcision to an extent, because there was this story, they were prosecuting these super traditional weird sect rabbi up in New York for...
Talking about the herpes?
I can't remember. But
So, yeah, I'll pause here. Well, okay, here we go. So, have you ever had sons or young? Have you actually seen a circumcision being performed? Anyone? So, when you perform a circumcision, after you cut off the foreskin, a little bit of blood comes out, right? And usually you take a pipette, which is basically a tube, to remove the blood. Okay. In ancient Jewish traditions, there was no pipette. I'm about to lose you guys. So instead, they performed oral suction. And still, some rabbis perform that today. And there were a small number, not a lot, but there were a small number of boys who contracted herpes and died. Well, okay, so a lot of people actually have it and don't even know. It's actually, people can carry it, it's asymptomatic. There are different strains of herpes, which to adults are fine, but to children with no immune systems are fatal. So there are different strains. So it's not the herp, right? It's strains that aren't symptomatic but are fatal for children. So I'm trying to be as neutral as I can here. So could you then mandate or prohibit that practice? And New York tried. So as far as New York City went is they said you have to give just informed consent, right? That the rabbi has to get informed consent that I'm going to use this procedure, and you have to sign a thing. And the rabbi said, screw that. That's not part of religion. We don't have to give people warnings. This is a holy thing. The city of New York basically flinched, and they didn't enforce it. So again, when you have these sorts of religious rituals, the state usually stays out of it. But is there a difference between when the state performs rituals versus, when the groups perform rituals versus when they perform services as part of their faith? And I think that's a good segue to the next case, Trinity Lutheran, right? Could the state tell a church, here's how you have to pray in church? No. Could they tell a playground, here are the minimum safety standards you need to have? Yeah. Here's the sanitation standards you need for your soup kitchen? Yes. Okay. Footnote 3. Is there a difference? Let's start there, right? Let's start with footnote 3 of the case, which is probably the most important part of the entire opinion. And this is why Roberts drives me crazy. He's like, oh, wow, I have this almost unanimous opinion with Justice Kagan, except Kagan puts this language that waters down the entire case. He needs to apologize for that one. Yeah. So let's start with footnote 3, right? We'll get to the facts in a minute, right? But he says, in this case, there's no dispute that Trinity Lutheran is put to the choice between being a church and receiving a government benefit. The rule is simple. No churches need apply. Then there's a footnote. It says, this case involves express discrimination based on religious identity with respect to playground resurfacing. We do not address religious uses of funding or other forms of discrimination. That is, this is not about how they worship, it's about who they are, that they're a church. Is there a difference between a person being a Christian and doing Christian things? This is Gorsuch's dissent. Katie, I think you're next. Is there a difference between discriminating against someone because they're Christian and regulating how they do Christian things?
Yeah, because one can't, well, that about just what they believe, and about their practices.
Okay, so I'll use Hobby Lobby as an example, right? And by the way, these two cases, they sort of feed onto each other. the Affordable Care Act and the regulations say that you have to provide certain forms of contraception, birth control, right? Now, this law doesn't discriminate against Hobby Lobby because they're Christian. It says nothing about if they're Christian. But it makes them do something they claim goes against the teachings of their faith. How do we draw out the distinction, right? Or I'll use an even easier example. This one's better, Katie. I'll try this one, right? You have, on the one hand, a nursing home for seniors. It's for profit, and they charge us whatever. And then you have another nursing home, and it's run by nuns, and they also charge a fee, but they're doing this because they think it's part of the gospel to help the elderly and the sick. Should we treat these businesses any differently? Yeah, in other words, you have one nursing home that charges a profit, and they tend to the elderly and the sick. And then you have another nursing home that does it, they also charge a fee, and they do it because they think the gospel teaches them to help the elderly and the sick. Yeah, Carlo, what do you think?
Well, I think that there's no one set answer, because you got to ask what is the activity that you're talking about.
Taking care of sick people.
If it's taking care of sick people, they should be treated no differently. But if you're then going to force something upon both parties, one that's the religious and one that's the for-profit, and it's like compelled speech or compelled action or whatever that's against their tenets, then that's something completely different. But if we're just talking about funding for their caring for the sick or the elderly, they shouldn't be treated any differently, because I don't think that act of caring for the elderly is any sort of promotion of religion. Or
What do you mean promotion?
well,
What does the Constitution protect? It protects the free blank of religion.
free exercise.
Yeah, let's go back to this question. What does it mean to exercise religion? This was the question we had last week.
Well, I think the exercise of religion is the actual is carrying out of the beliefs, and the protection of that exercise is not.
What do you mean carrying out? Let's be more precise. That just praying?
No, I don't think it's just praying. I think it's actually observing what the teachings are,
and what if the teachings say to care for those less fortunate and to care for the sick and the elderly?
Well, this is then just the way I see it. I don't think there's any conflict there with what those who are religious actors or those who are for-profit actors are doing. I mean, if they're both carrying it out or carrying out that behavior, whether it's because it's for profit or the religion's telling them, you don't have any sort of conflict, and you don't have any.
Oh, but there is a conflict with the. This is not the case you have with the Little Sisters of the Poor, right? You know, the Little Sisters of the Poor, it's a group of nuns. They run nursing homes, and they objected to the Obamacare contraceptive mandate.
Well, the Obamacare contraceptive mandate, though, is then forcing them to take certain actions that were against the way that their religion.
Well, they weren't being, no one was making the nuns take birth control, right?
No.
They had to just pay for a fund, and some of that fund would then go towards.
Paying for the fund, it just kind of goes back to like where your money is kind of your speech. I mean,
Oh, now we're back in speech. Oh no.
Yeah, so I mean, but I think it's very similar to that. If you're forcing somebody to contribute to a behavior that is against their religion, then that's where you find yourself with a problem.
Thanks. That was good, Carlo. Yeah, I put you on a couple different ropes. So, Carlo, what do you think? I'm sorry, Gabe, what do you think?
Well, what is the question?
Shit, yeah, I don't remember anymore. So, Gabe, the question is this, right? Should we limit the free exercise to just praying in the pews? Or can this exercise of religion extend beyond to other things, running a playground maybe, running a homeless shelter, running a nursing home for the sick and the elderly. How far does free exercise of religion go?
Using the same scenario that one center is caring for the elderly. Okay, so from the a comment you made last class, you said that exercise, it's not just opinion beliefs, but it's also conduct.
Did I say that?
Yeah.
Oh, it's good. I'm glad I said that.
But
Do you agree?
I think that as far as making, one center have let's say a different tax or like a different benefit, but they have the same action, I don't think they should be treated different because they're doing the same action regardless of their belief.
In other words, so Gabe, you don't think it matters that one group is motivated by profit and the other group is motivated by Christ? You don't think it makes a difference?
No, because then the other center could say they're a church for something randomly, and then they get a benefit.
Oh, that's fraud. I mean, so courts will generally ask, is a belief sincerely held? You always see that in the opinions. Like Ginsburg said, we don't doubt they're sincere, right? In the Hobby Lobby case, right? In fact, I think it was either Ginsburg or Sotomayor who said during arguments like to Paul Clement, you picked the perfect plaintiffs. And then Clement said, no, I didn't pick them. The government came after my plaintiffs, my clients. He's so good. Paul Clement is wonderful. If you want to listen to the arguments in Hobby Lobby, he killed it. He was really good. But yeah, so does exercise, is that limited to just the pews, or does it extend even further? David?
I mean, I would say it extends further because, I mean, it's a comment that it's conduct. So, I mean, conduct extends much further.
But then what about the Mormon case, right? The polygamy case. Let's go back to the very first reading in our topic, where they told the Mormon guy, no, you can't get married, and the court said it's limited to beliefs, not conduct. The Reynolds decision, right? That was the first case we had in this topic. Keep coming back to that one.
Right, well, that one, I mean, but in that one, there was a long tradition of banning polygamy.
Okay.
The court fell back on, so they kind of rectified their belief.
Oh, man. Yeah, I mean, the issue we had in the Reynolds case comes up in Trinity Lutheran, right? It comes up in Hobby Lobby. Brittany, your hand was up a few minutes ago. Sorry if I didn't call on you.
He was talking about inflicting beliefs and pain.
I'm sorry, inflicting, you said?
Well, the whole thing of like forcing the nuns to pay for it, isn't that kind of like the union dues where you're being forced to pay for something?
Yeah, so Justice Alito on Hobby Lobby, I realize I'm jumping back and forth, but Alito on Hobby Lobby said there's no doubt that making Hobby Lobby pay for this contraception is burdening their religion. Do you think that's wrong? Does making someone pay for a form of contraception they think immoral, is that a burden on their religion?
I don't know if that's necessarily a burden.
Who gets to decide what a burden is in religion? I think Dyer next. Who gets to decide what's a burden in religion? Do the courts say, no, Mr. Green, no, David and Barbara Green, you're not really being burdened?
It goes with like the sincerity and the only
Yeah.
people who are being burdened can really judge that.
So this was an issue in Hobby Lobby the government did not want to do, right? I assure you there are a lot of people who said, bullshit, right? Paying a few extra dollars for an employee for some, you're never going to feel it, right? It's just being paid into an undifferentiated fund. You have no involvement in the money being spent. How does paying money burden your faith? The government didn't go down this road, and Ginsburg kind of hinted at it, but she didn't really go on this position very hard. But wouldn't the answer just be, unless we're actually making the nuns take the morning after pill, there's no burden? Right? Unless we're actually making, I think Barbara Green is past the age of fertility, but unless we're actually making Barbara Green, engage in acts of contraception, then she's not being burdened. That merely paying for something is not itself a burden. This goes back to the Janus case, I think Brittany and Carlo alluded to a few minutes ago. But let's go, so Roxy, let's just try this question a little more precise though. How far does exercise go? Should we treat running of this is Sotomayor's point in dissent, right? Should we treat the running of a playground as no different than praying? This is what Sotomayor says. She actually makes this point in a different context, but she says we should treat the playground no different because they're trying to spread the word of God either on the swings or the tires or the pews. Is there a difference?
I don't know. I mean, I can see you have the playground is, they're using it to maybe recruit more people who.
Yeah. Yeah, you have this awesome playground. The kids come, the parents come, they start worshiping. It's a marketing tactic, right? I think that's a fair point. Now, we haven't done the establishment clause yet, but I think Roxy's point is a good jumping off. Free exercise and establishment are often intertwined. They overlap a lot, right? Because in Hobby Lobby, right, Alito's saying we want to read exercise very broadly, right? That exercise would even go so far as having to pay some money to fund birth control. And then in Trinity Lutheran, Sotomayor in the dissent is reading exercise broadly, saying, look, they're not operating this playground just to keep kids from having scraped knees, right? They want this tire scrap money to promote their faith. And she says there's an establishment clause problem. Do you see that they're related, right? When you have a very broad conception of exercise, it runs into the establishment clause. And when you have a very broad conception of establishment, it runs into the free exercise clause. These two issues are intertwined. And this goes back to Madison's memorial remonstrance, right? Is making people pay the tax for the teachers, is that a burden of their exercise? Or is it meant to an establishment of religion? Or is it a little bit of both? And in every case, I think Roberts wrote the most narrow frickin' opinion possible in Trinity Lutheran. He has to apologize for that. He sort of avoided the establishment issue. He didn't even talk about it. Right? He says, oh, this is just by keeping knees, knees aren't being scraped, whatever else he said, right? But I think Sotomayor's point is well taken, that the reason why this church operates as daycare is not because they want to make some money. It's not because they want to have a good daycare center. It's to promote the word of God in their facilities, right? The Little Sisters of the Poor, they have a nursing home, and they also give communion to their guests, right? They sing songs, they worship with them, they pray with them. I met the Little Sisters. I was at the Supreme Court oral argument for Little Sisters of the Poor. And afterwards, at this huge lunch with like 100 nuns, like a casting call for The Sound of Music. It was awesome. I felt very out of place, but they were very nice. There it is. There it is. Thank you. Joyce got it. It was pretty cool, though. They didn't want anything to do with this case. They hated this case. They don't care about the courts. They just want to do their thing with their patients. They're very sweet. What do I know? Okay. But everyone get the general frame, right? Exercise and establishment clause, they keep butting into each other. When the government provides greater protection for free exercise, it might give rise to an establishment clause violation. But if they're too concerned about the establishment clause, they end up running into free exercise. Think of the Trinity Lutheran case, right? Missouri said, we are so afraid of entangling church and state that we're going to deny funding for this church group. Right? They were so afraid of establishment that they violated free exercise. And the flip side, think about Hobby Lobby, people argue this, that they're so concerned about protecting the rights of free exercise that they're actually promoting religious belief in state doctrine. Right? They're actually making Obamacare about Christian teachings. And some people actually think, this is not a joke, that RFRA violates the establishment clause. There's a lot of scholars who write this, that RFRA provides such great protection for free exercise that it amounts to the states entangling into religion. And this is a non-trivial argument. Had the Supreme Court gone a little bit to the left, I think the court would have struck down RFRA as unconstitutional altogether. But that won't happen, I don't think. Yeah, Noel.
Could you repeat what you said when you were before? You said when the state is too concerned about free exercise.
Yeah. When the state is too concerned about free exercise, like in Hobby Lobby, right, that actually runs into establishment clause. You're basically transforming Christian teaching, so to speak, into state doctrine. That now the Affordable Care Act has to be administered according to the dictates of faith. Right, there are these two. Yeah, go ahead, Noel.
But right before that, you said when the government provides greater protection.
What I meant is when the courts require greater protection. But thank you. Yeah, these concepts are related. I don't know a good way of teaching this because you have to do free exercise first and establishment clause, but I think Trinity Lutheran brings both cases in. Yeah.
If the government gives this church money, do they also get to control how it's used? Like you have to, just like they control schools, like you have to have all, it has to be open to everyone.
Well, that's a concern about entanglement, right? Let's take a step back. Let me ask this question. I think, Jesse, you're next. Why do you think Missouri enacted this policy where they said we're not going to give any money to religion, right? And Sotomayor develops, I think, very well in her dissent, right? Why do you think Missouri has this policy in their state constitution that says we're not going to give money to religion?
Well, I mean, I think it's like you were saying, they were just trying to completely avoid this whole entanglement issue.
Bingo. This is John's question, right? How can the state put strings on how a church uses its money? They say, look, we don't want to put strings into religion, so instead what are we going to do? We won't give you anything. But is that itself discriminating against for the exercise of their faith? You see, it's a loop, right? You're in this vicious cycle, like a dog chasing his tail, right? They say, we don't want to be entangled with religion, so we're going to cut religion out. But does cutting religion out violate free exercise?
Well, couldn't they just say, put the condition on the money that is minimal, just saying that in order to get the money, you've got to show us either that you've already spent the money for this rubber padding, or within 90 days that you have an order for it, or...
And then what happens if they give them money and the church says, screw this, we're going to spend it on communion wafers? Then what? Do you enforce them? Do you send... Do you send an officer there to confiscate the waivers as forlorn property, right? That the waivers are asset forfeiture, right? That you know. This is John's question, right? So my question to Jesse was a little unfair, but the question was, why do these states enact these laws? There are a lot of reasons. One of them is anti-Catholic bias, right? If you remember a case called Pierce v. Society of Sisters, this was was it Oregon or Washington? It was Oregon banned private schools, right? And the lead plaintiffs were a group of nuns. Now, the reason why they banned private schools was they hated Catholics, right? This is not well known today, but there was a huge anti-Catholic bias, like humongous. So a lot of these, what were called Blaine amendments, you'll hear this after Senator Blaine from Maine. A lot of these Blaine amendments, which banned funding of religion, were basically just to shut down Catholic churches. That's what they were. They were anti-Catholic bias. But they've been sort of resurrected, poor choice of words, as being neutrality provisions. That's not what they were. They were about being anti-Catholic. But now they're about preventing entanglement. And they say, look, in order to avoid these tough questions, like how do we make sure they're spending the rubber chips in the right place? You know, what if instead of using the chips in the playground, they're using the chips in their, you know, in their ministry for something else? We don't want to be involved. We'll just cut out religion. But if you cut out religion, is that a violation of free exercise? It's a dog chasing his tail. Yeah, McKinney.
So on this whole issue of entanglement, and when Sotomayor brings up that they want the government to remain secular, I was kind of surprised that didn't come up in this opinion at all, but why didn't they just say, well, churches don't pay taxes, so you don't get public funding? And in your opinion, is there any reason why that didn't come up?
Well,
or am I missing the mark?
Well,
I have the same question.
I'm sorry, so say the question one more time?
So, I mean, they're talking about we want to keep the government secular, and we want to avoid this entanglement issue, and at least Sotomayor was, and I was just wondering why it didn't come up in the opinion at all, that they don't say something like, churches don't pay taxes, so you don't get public funding. Period.
Okay, so let me ask this question, right?
I'm sorry?
Other nonprofits that still pay, they don't pay
Yeah,
taxes.
yeah, that's true. Lots of nonprofits pay taxes. Let me ask this question, right? You're in a church, there's a fire. You call 911. They say, I'm sorry. You know what? We don't want to have to go inside your church. Maybe we'll see your worship. Maybe we'll step on some of your icons. We're not coming over. Right? Little kid in the playground breaks his knee. 911, I'm sorry. You know, we can't provide the service. There's too much entanglement. We don't want to have to intrude on your religion. We'll just leave you alone. So is it really going to be the argument, no public services for a church? Is that actually going to be... This is Breyer, by the way. Breyer was on this during arguments like, well, you can't have someone call 911 and the police don't show up. That's insane.
Yeah, but those are like almost a necessity as public policy. But giving you money for a playground has nothing to do with the exercise.
Well, but you just rely based on public necessities, right? Are we talking about entanglement or what's the problem?
Well, if you're going to call for 911 because your church is on fire, if I really want to go broad policy, well, it's only going to spread if I don't do something.
Okay, so you don't get telephone service, right? You don't get installation of sewage. right?
I think that's already there and you accept it. But my thought is, if you're tax exempt, that's about as much of an endorsement as we can give you. Take that money you were saving and spend it on your playground, but everybody else pays it. I can't say that you're discriminating.
But nonprofits, religious nonprofits, I'm sorry,
I love
non-religious,
yoga, but I still have to pay a
not
studio
non-religious nonprofits, right? I have a nonprofit. I don't pay taxes on it.
Yeah.
Why does the fact that a nonprofit's religious change the equation? Lots of groups receive tax exempt status.
If you, so the tax exempt status that I'm familiar with churches is the exemption from property.
Property tax, that's right.
A lot greater than not having to pay.
There's also sales tax exemptions. Yeah. Yeah.
So as a nonprofit, I doubt that you're exempt from property taxes, right?
Right, I was talking about income tax. So your point is, if you get some state benefit, you can surrender others.
I have not, no, that's not my point. My point is only that churches have a much greater tax exemption than most.
But why should that disqualify them from other benefits which are not restricted on that basis?
Personally, I think they should not have that exemption. But if they are going to have that exemption, I don't have an issue with disqualifying.
So
them
could the
from
state say, as a general matter, we will not give any benefits to anyone who receives a tax exempt status for property tax?
Yeah, probably a state tax. Yeah, they probably.
So it's, the law says if you receive a state property tax exemption, you are disqualified from all public grants.
Or at least from all public grants to the extent of your tax.
And who are the only groups that receive property tax exemptions?
Churches.
Aha! This is Roberts' point. They're penalized just for being a church.
Right. But
You're okay with
only
that?
to the extent
Yeah.
that they're benefiting them.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Right. Yeah, McKinney.
Just in response, I mean, I think the people that, the congregation as individuals, they do pay those taxes to get those services. So if they have to call a fire truck to the church, they did kind of pay for that. But to get money for improvements to the property, I think it's kind of apples and oranges there.
Yeah, Carl.
I think the church also is part of a community, and the community itself doesn't have an exemption. And that's typically where you find the fire department and the police department. They're part of a community, so they service the community, not necessarily the property itself. I think it's a big, and plus the playground thing, I'm still struggling with the entanglement idea because of they're financing something for the public good, apparently. Playground, softer surface.
That also.
Not interfering with necessarily the free rights to use for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, what?
If you're not from a certain area and you don't pay their taxes, you're still entitled to some services for if you get injured.
You know, does a homeless person not get access to 911?
Right. I mean, you still get those services. You're still entitled to them regardless of your taxpayer status or not. And so I think you could create a regimen of classifications of services that if you don't pay taxes and you are benefiting from that, then you would not in turn receive these benefits that taxpayers are paying into.
Good. Let's walk, Andrew. I think you're next. Let's walk through the. Let's actually walk through the. Oh no, I'm sorry. I skipped Ruth. I'm sorry, Ruth. Let's actually walk through the facts of the case, right? Why was you're down the road? You're two next, Ruth. Why was the Trinity Lutheran Church denied this funding? You know, this is like these are rubber. Basically, they chop up rubber tires and they make these little chips, right? You see these. So if you go on a playground, you fall, you don't bust your knee up, right? I remember everything was asphalt and concrete when I was a kid. We didn't have rubber chips. You fell, you learn a lesson. So Ruth, why was the Trinity Lutheran Church denied the funding for these rubber chip grants?
Due to a policy that was in the Missouri Constitution.
Okay, so tell me about this policy.
So it's Article 1, Section 7. It says that no money shall ever be taken from the public treasury, directly or indirectly, in aid of any church, sect, or denomination of religion.
Okay. Why does Chief Justice Roberts think that they were denied? How does Justice Roberts conceive of this denial?
Because they were discriminated due to their religious character.
Good. Okay, very good answer. The religious identity, the religious character. And I want to focus on this point. I want to come back to this, right? Roberts doesn't go down the rabbit hole, which I think we're going down very far, which is why it drives me nuts. But he doesn't want to go down the rabbit hole of, was the church implementing their doctrine, their teachings, through the playground? All Roberts says is, they were being shut down from this funding because they were identified as a church, because their character, their status, you can phrase it different ways, right, was a church. He says that they can't do. In other words, they were being put to a choice. You can either be a church or take the funding. This sounds a lot like Sherbert, doesn't it, right? You can either be a member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church or you can get your unemployment check. You can't do both. And Robert says this is a choice which the church cannot be put to. Dyer, I saw you shaking your head very vigorously in that one. No?
I don't think you can separate the. I agree with Sotomayor's dissent, and I don't think you can separate the ministry that they're conducting through the children from.
Yeah, let me just take a step back, and I'll bridge this to Hobby Lobby for a minute. I wrote a lot. If you want to read my book on this, I have an entire volume, but I'll summarize it briefly. The Affordable Care Act has different components, right? There was one provision known as the Women's Health Amendment. This was a provision passed actually fairly quietly, didn't make much of a stir. And it just said if you're providing insurance, you need to provide certain preventive care for women. If you look at the debates over that bill, what was preventive care? Mammograms, cancer screenings, right? There was like one obscure reference to family planning, but they were very quiet about this. Why? They knew once Obamacare was passed that the agency would just write these wonderful regulations and define preventive care to include the FDA-approved birth control. Okay, so we have this mandate. Originally, right? Originally, there were different versions of the mandate. Originally, the only groups exempted were houses of worship. If you were a house of worship, you were exempted. If you were a religious nonprofit, such as the Little Sisters of the Poor, you were not exempted. You had to pay for it. There was a huge uproar. And even liberal groups realized that they screwed up. And the Obama administration backed and said, okay, fine. We'll give an accommodation to the religious nonprofits, like the Little Sisters of the Poor. And what's the accommodation? Complicated, but they had to basically certify this form and someone else would pay for it. I don't want to get into the details because it's really complicated. But they didn't have to pay out of their own pocket. But originally, the Obama administration drew a distinction between houses of worship and religious nonprofits. That is, those who actually were doing the praying and ministries who put their beliefs into practice. The distinction they drew is footnote 3, right? They tried to say, okay, we will give an exemption for actual churches and synagogues and mosques. You're not bound by this mandate. But if you are a nursing home that's religious, you're covered. If you are a Christian university, there's one, Belmont Abbey, they basically train monks, right? You're not covered. And I remember there's this one line in the brief that always stuck out in my head, and it said that, not even Jesus Christ would have been religious enough because he ministers to the poor rather than working in a church, right? And this came up in the litigation. They said, well, you know, if my church runs a hypothermia shelter, we don't check baptism certificates at the door, make sure that everyone's a Christian. You take in whoever comes in off the street. And this was a huge issue, that they drew this distinction between different grades of religiosity, right? Between those who are actually houses of worship and those who are practicing it through nonprofit work. And I actually put a brief in the Supreme Court making this point that the agency didn't have the authority to draw this distinction. It was based on administrative law, nothing to do with First Amendment. But this is it's a tough question, right? Can you treat differently houses of worship and religious nonprofits? Can you make the religious nonprofits subject to one standard, they're exempted, and they're accommodated, and the churches are exempted altogether? This was the exact issue that I wrote a brief on Little Sisters of the Poor, and it fits with Trinity Lutheran very neatly. Footnote 3. Anyone? Is the Christian university or the Christian nursing home different than the church itself? Or if a church has a church and then they have the daycare as a separate entity, is that different? Or if a church has a homeless a food shelter, right? And the food shelter is run by an LLC, a separate LLC, which is often the case. Because they need to buy food and do different things.
I feel like when you put the words in free exercise, just kind of expand something out there.
So it's not just belief, it's conduct also. This is back to the polygamy case, right? You see, we keep going in circles without any satisfactory resolution at all. Anyone else? Is a church okay, but the homeless shelter, food kitchen that's on the side of the building, separate LLC, different? Same people running it, right? The priest is the one doling out the food. The nuns are the ones tending to the poor. Whit?
I think it just depends on the regulation. Because you could make a really gray area with defining the entity, or you can make it really clear, like there's these mega church camps who make lots of profit and pay thousands of dollars of tuition, or charged out thousands of dollars to have kids come for the summer. Obviously, it's kind of removed, in my opinion, from, this is our ministry. But then other people would argue that that's not correct. We're offering our ministry to children. But if the regulation is what's the focus rather than the designation of the group, if that interest is strong enough, then, I guess I have a hard time seeing it's kind of going back to getting away from targeting the church for sacrificing. If it was just for health concerns, that interest probably trumps a lot of religion.
Colby, your hand up? And then, yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking, it's almost like it's gonna require the court to apply strict scrutiny to the churches itself and look behind the reasons why they're operating.
And that's a problem.
Instead of giving deference to the churches and saying on the face, like, oh, this is how we're practicing, or this is what we're doing with our conduct. It's more of like, they need to look more at the purpose instead of giving deference to the...
And is there a problem with scrutinizing the church doctrine to figure out where it falls? If it's maybe the mega church, Lakewood is one deal, and then St. Peter's is a different deal.
Yes, and that's where the issue lies. But like, if you're going to try to fix a problem, you're going to have to look to the reasons and the intentions of the church behind what it looks like on the face.
Yeah, I saw there and there. Yeah.
So, I kind of look at the playground situation. I went to a Catholic school growing up, right? So it's connected to the church, it's part of the church, everything. But it wasn't exactly it wasn't a rich Catholic school.
Mm-hmm.
The only reason we were able to stay afloat is because we had federal grants and things like that.
Yeah.
So you could argue, it's part of the church and it's part of its ministry at the same time. But there were plenty of kids there that weren't Catholic and they were never actually converted there. But I don't know. I feel like...
Dana, your hand was up a minute ago. I'm sorry, louder, please.
I think the houses of worship and the religious nonprofits can be treated differently because to become a house of worship or a church, don't they have to meet a certain status as compared to a nonprofit, just like legal standing wise?
No, there is a difference between a house of worship and nonprofits. They are treated differently in certain regards. So, for example, we mentioned tax before. If you are a house of worship, you don't have to file a tax return, period. No. If you are a nonprofit, you do, right? You're both tax exempt, but there are different reporting requirements for a house of worship and religious nonprofit. No one else want to add anything? These are very, very hard questions. I'm enjoying this discussion a lot. I learn a lot from all of you. It's very stuff, a sounding board. Okay. All right, so let's go. Anyone else want to talk about Roberts? We went to Gorsuch. Let's talk about Gorsuch for a minute. I think, Joyce, you're next. What's Justice Gorsuch peeved about? He's annoyed here. He's not happy. This was one of his first opinions also. He was only on the bench for a fairly short time when he wrote this. Okay, that's fine, Joyce. Okay, Andrew, want to give me Justice Gorsuch?
So I didn't really see
the distinction he was trying to make, but he thinks there's a difference between religious status and religious use.
Yeah. Okay. So what does use mean? It's a strange phrase, and it's not obvious what he means by that.
So, if I remember correctly, he drew the line of like use as the way we did like the soup kitchen and stuff like that, and status was like the house of worship.
I think that's about right. I think that's good. Yeah. It's a very fuzzy. He was also not. He's usually pretty clear. He's a little fuzzy here.
And I just like the way he put in all the case citations. It didn't really clear it up for me when it normally does. But
No. I'll give you it. So at one point he says that the free exercise of religion, the Constitution protects the free exercise of religion, not just the right to inward belief or status. And again, so he's equating belief and status. So where he says status, I would substitute that for belief.
okay.
And where he says use, the way you use funds, I would substitute that for conduct. So I think he's going back to Reynolds, the polygamy case.
He would just disagree with the entire Reynolds.
The polygamy line, yeah. I think anyone want to add? This is my first time actually teaching this case. I'm still working my way through it.
Now that you explain it that way, that does make more sense of what he's saying. In that he wouldn't distinguish the two. He would say the free exercise of religion does both include belief and exercise in itself.
Yeah. So I think I'm making notes of my thing because I think that was good. Often I don't know how to teach something until I actually do it, and then it comes out. It sounds right. So I think he's equating use with conduct, and identity or status with belief. Does that sound plausible to all of you? I think that's what he's doing. And this basically is disagreeing with the polygamy case, the Reynolds case from the 1800s, which we studied the first week of this topic. Again, he's only with Thomas, so there are only 2 votes for this position. But what I think happened here, and I don't know exactly, but what I think happened here is either Kennedy or Kagan, I don't know which one. I put my money on Kagan. Told Roberts, if you add footnote 3, I'll join your opinion with that dissent. And I think Roberts, of course, did. Even though that creates this huge other schism that maybe the courts can deal with in the future. But Kagan's very good at that. She's always good at telling Roberts, all right, I'll join your opinion if you just change it in all these different ways. It's like, oh, of course, Lane, whatever you want. Because Roberts loves when the liberal justices join his majority. See, it's not 5-4, it's 7-2, although Breyer not really. It's really 6-3 and kind of, but then two breaking off. So I think that's what happened here. I don't know. We'll never find out until we're all really old and dead, because the papers won't be around for a long time.
When he retires and writes you that letter.
Unless Ginsburg, and that's my hope, releases everything right away, which she just might because she's sort of badass like that. She doesn't care. If Ginsburg releases everything right away, I'm good. Otherwise, we're screwed for a couple decades. I will read all the papers. Okay, let's do the Sotomayor dissent. And I think she makes, it's almost like this is a different case, right? It's like you read Roberts, then you read Gorsuch, and then you read Sotomayor, and it's like 3 different cases, like completely different facts. Joyce, you have Sotomayor?
Yes.
Okay, you want to give me Justice Sotomayor, please?
Yeah, so she disagrees with the court coming in and funding the church. She thinks that the prior cases, that's never happened, so it shouldn't, basically the court and the church should be kept separate. And she talks about, where the court actually gave money to non-public funding, but she said the funding in those cases came with assurance that public funds would not be used for religious activity.
Mm-hmm.
So she's basically agreeing that they should not fund the playground because it would also violate the establishment clause.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Joyce. She describes the facts, I think, in a very different way. She says, when the government funds a house of worship, it underwrites this religious activity, religious exercise. She's actually taking the broader view that I think that I suggested a minute ago, right? In a way, she's agreeing with Gorsuch. Everyone just wants to see this, right? Gorsuch says exercise is not limited to belief. Exercise means conduct, right? That's Gorsuch. Sotomayor says the same thing. She says exercise means conduct. She's saying that the way that this ministry operates is by promoting the spiritual growth of children. She says the playground surface, like the sanctuary pews, is integrated to religious mission. The playground surface is religious, as she says. In a bizarre way, Gorsuch and Sotomayor agree. Everyone see that point, right? They both agree that religion is not limited to belief, which is why Roberts makes this distinction between use and identity. He's saying, well, we don't really care about what they're doing, we care about who they are. And by doing that, Roberts can avoid this entire mess. He can sort of like tap dance or maybe jungle monkey bar, right, over this entire mess and just say, oh, we don't care about what they're doing. They're religious. That's enough. It's a church. Identity, status, character. But Sotomayor is saying they're not putting these playground chips out there to make money. They're doing it to spread their ministry, to spread the word of God. That if someone's walking on the block and sees this cool playground, oh yeah, let's go play with my kids. And oh, let's maybe say some prayers over lunch. And oh, maybe I'll be more Lutheran, whatever, right? But she takes this fact in the opposite direction. She says, because the chips would be religious, the state is justified in withholding that benefit. Why? Because to provide that benefit would itself be an establishment of religion. What she's suggesting, and she doesn't quite say this, what she's suggesting is that all public funding of any religious entity involves entanglement, and and the state should avoid it. She doesn't quite say that. I want to be very careful, but she sure as hell hints it, right? And then we go back to the 911 example and say, oh, well, that's a necessity, right? So then where do you draw the line, right? What sorts of public services can you give to a house of worship, which ones can't you? Maybe a necessity is an argument, I don't know. This is why Breyer wrote this very brief concurring opinion where he says, well, this is narrow. I don't have to discuss these tough issues. Police and fire protection, it's not the purpose, right? This is about health and safety of the children, right? Breyer says, this is about making sure kids don't injure their knees. That's it. This is no different than the police and fire. We'll handle this dumpster fire in another case. So Breyer is just very concerned about what the Sotomayor ruling would do. If Sotomayor and Ginsburg are correct, then all the grants to all these schools would be unconstitutional. Fire services, police services, right, would have to be shut down. And Breyer loves the status quo. He just loves keeping things the way they are, generally. So he says, we can't have that. So everyone just get this weird interplay, right? This was such a fascinating case, and it could have gone so many different directions. The Roberts opinion, which again drives me nuts, was the most narrow thing possible. It avoided the Gorsuch mess, and it avoided the Sotomayor mess. And that's where Breyer can go along with it. Okay. All right. Anything else on Sotomayor or Gorsuch or Breyer? I sort of went through the last one a little quickly. I think we talked about Sotomayor a bit through our class.
I mean, I know Breyer kind of, I guess, is tiptoeing around the muddy issue of the fact that, the reason why the state had this program was it wanted to improve the safety of playgrounds.
Yeah.
But essentially the state was like, we want to improve the safety of playgrounds unless it's a church playground.
Yeah, scrape away.
Then it's just, broken glass and sharp rocks and you're good to go.
And then you have to call 911 to fix all the nicked knees, right? Put the Band-Aids on, the boo-boos.
It loops back around and around and around.
Right. Again, what if this wasn't tire scraps, right? What if this was something that's a little bit more controversial? So, busing, right? There are a lot of cases. Can the state provide funding for school buses to get kids to religious schools? Right. The school buses themselves aren't religious. It's a kid in a safe bus to make sure it's they're not going to get into an accident, but they're being taken to a house of worship, being taken to a religious school. What about funding of science books used in religious schools? Right. Most religious schools have a secular component and a religious component. Funding science books and chemistry or physics, whatever. Right. Can the state fund those? Math books, right? That's not in no way religious. But if students in these classes have these books, they'll be promoting the ministry because, wow, this school is great, all these brand new books. If you take the Sotomayor position carefully, and I think you take it to its extension, then all this stuff is unconstitutional, right? It all violates the Establishment Clause. And if you take the Gorsuch position carefully, then to deny these ministries or funding would itself violate free exercise, which is why Roberts went straight down the line. He's good at that, keeping these narrow.
What if cities set up regulations? If you want a playground, you gotta have the tire chips, to keep the kids safe.
Yeah.
And help some places, give the grants to cover it, but not to churches.
Roberts will say that's unconstitutional, violates free exercise. Roberts says if you have any law that singles out churches and only houses of worship for disparate treatment, it's facial unconstitutional.
What if they're eligible, but they're just lower in priority?
Well, that's a different story, right? Right. I mean, I think, they rank 5 out of 40 something, 5 out of 44 in the case. So, I mean, they were a high-ranking thing. Now, I suppose you could do it quietly and just downgrade all the churches and give them low scores because you don't want to help churches. That would be like a Lukumi case, right? Imagine that you have the people in this office giving low scores to all their churches because they don't like churches. Then you have Lukumi. Then you have a Smith, strict scrutiny.
I mean, part of the majority was that, in part 3, was that what made it so discriminate or in violation of free exercise is it wasn't allowing them to compete solely because they were a church against secular, secular organizations. And if you're gonna if you're gonna basically stack the deck in someone's favor, then that's essentially taking away the competition for it.
Yeah.
But secondly, I really don't buy the dissent and where they're just like, this is gonna be increase their message or something, the religious message, because this money was just for rubber chips. Like, to me, that's too attenuated to say like these rubber chips for a playground are gonna somehow bring all the masses into the church. Like I think she's just making a ridiculous argument.
Jesse?
I'm just gonna say, do you have children?
I have nephews I watch all the time.
I mean, because that's a big thing when you're looking at where you send your children for school and for.
Oh, you have to think about that now.
What sort of amenities do they have? What does the playground look like? Does it have rubber chips or concrete?
Really? So you look at that when you pick out a playground for your kid?
I don't have kids, but
Oh, okay. In theory. Okay. The first question is, you have kids. That's a fair point. That's a fair point. So I think, I mean, at the margin, it might make one facility more attractive as more modern amenities. I think it's a fair point. Carlo.
That is one of the things that we looked at when we were shopping around where we're going to send my son. And I mean, that's something that you come to expect, at least, that the playground is safe, or it's not, they're not going to go down the slide and get a big cut or something like that. But my son goes to a school that is outside of our religion, and it is a religious school. We don't feel any sort of pressure, or we're not compelled to join them just because our son is going to a religious school that's outside of our religion. And to kind of piggyback on what was said earlier, I went to Catholic high school and also a university that I had friends there that were of all faiths, and nobody, not a single one of them that I know, changed their religion. I mean, I invited some of my friends who are Muslim to Thanksgiving and to celebrate Christmas with us, and one of them actually took me up on it. I mean, but that doesn't mean that they then changed their, just kind of being exposed to, I guess, different.
No, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but to some degree, you're sort of soliciting worshipers, whether you get them or not.
At the margin,
Exactly.
right? I mean, there'll be some people who send their kids there and love the way that their kids are treated. So maybe I'll go to this church on Sunday, check it out. And that's not why these are not proselytizing missions, right? This is not knocking door to door, but it may have the effect. John?
How come instead of just giving them money, saying, well, the state, we bought all these chips, and yeah, you're all eligible to come and pick them up, but we're not giving you money.
It'll be a race, whoever can get the most chips.
You have the access to the chips. You
From
pick
9
your
to
own
5,
drugs.
take as many chips as you want.
But wouldn't that avoid the whole problem
Oh
of
my
forcing them through money? It's like
that'd be chaos. People fighting over
issue them to the cities and municipalities, and from there they distribute them to who needs it on a first come, first served basis. Wasn't that to avoid the
Roxy,
money altogether?
help, save us.
Well, it's just instant when I was picking a school kind of like this for my daughter, that is one of the things we did. We looked at like, what is the school, education, the classrooms, things like that. And for her to go to that school, which is outside our religion, but it was a religious school, she did, to participate in like the spring, you know, concerts or whatever, the little programs, she had to participate in their religious services. So there would be like a mass ahead of time, and then the kids sing. So it would be like, you would have to take her out. So they are kind of putting it on you.
They don't lay it on thin and thick. Yeah, Jesse?
So I worked at a Lutheran preschool, I'm a preschool teacher, and we had minimum standards that we had to follow to be like a licensed daycare center,
Yeah.
quote unquote. And one of the minimum standards was on our playground, we weren't allowed to have certain height of slides or metal slides. So if they can regulate the slides in that sense, where if you're a licensed childcare facility, I would say, why not just say all childcare facilities have to have the rubber chips?
Okay.
Do you know what I mean?
Right, but so, but the question is, can the state help people pay for them if they can't afford them? Right, and I think this goes back to Kyle's suggestion earlier, right? Or I forget who said it. Can they regulate the interior of a church? And so you have to have drainage, and you have a hose, right? And stainless steel counters? Probably not. Can they say that the playgrounds have slides of so many feet? Yeah, so maybe is there a difference then between the house of worship itself and the ministry on the outside?
I mean, just what everyone said from their personal anecdote just kind of goes to what I said. And the dissent, they really, if you read between the lines, they're saying it's going to open the floodgates of like just drawing masses of new worshipers in because of chips. Something little like this. And that's like the point. Like, no one here really said they were so compelled to go to worship.
It's at the margin. I think Sotomayor had a little hyperbole. I'll give her that.
Yeah,
But
I mean,
but I'll say at the margin, if you find yourself enamored by where your child's going to school for daycare, you might decide to go there on Sunday. Maybe decide to take a class or something. Maybe send your second kid there. Yeah, Joyce.
I'm wondering why the church didn't just get donations, because I know like I used to be a nanny, and one of the girls was planning on going to a Catholic school, and the parents literally started going to church and donating, even though they're not Catholic, just so that their daughter can get in. So why didn't the church just ask the members to?
Well, I'm sure. Look, so all house of worship asks for money all the time. People get tapped out. But this was a source of government funding, and said we don't have to bother our ministry, our members. We can get it from the state. Yeah, David.
Well, I think the church's argument wasn't that they should give the money. Their argument was we shouldn't be disqualified simply for paying.
Yeah, and that's Robert's. Yeah, yeah. That they didn't have to make the money available. If they made it available, they couldn't make it on a discriminatory basis. And then after, so I'll do Hobby Lobby quickly. Yeah.
Kind of curious question. When you're building a house of worship, you do still have to build it to code, correct?
Yes. Yes, we have to build a code. But what if again, I'll use the NRA example. A code for what? A code for a building or a code for a slaughterhouse?
For a building.
Okay, and what if you're using it as a slaughterhouse? Or let's say you perform a circumcision at Brit Milah. Are you building a code for a house of worship or a surgical facility? You're performing surgery. I mean, it is. You're performing surgery, and it's generally done on a pillow, held by a person on a chair. It's not done in a surgical stainless steel facility. You wash your hands, but you're not scrubbing. Okay. Let's do Hobby Lobby. And I can do this one fairly quickly. I think we've already talked about the major facts. Again, the ACA didn't actually have a contraceptive mandate, but it was so interpreted by the administrative process. And the first case to get to the court was in 2014. That was actually a good year for the conservatives. They actually won a couple of cases, very rare. But Kennedy went along in this one. the question is whether the federal government could make religious for-profit corporations, like Hobby Lobby, pay into a fund that might be used to fund contraception. Now, Hobby Lobby didn't object to all forms of birth control. There are like 20-something methods. I forget the exact number. They objected to 4 in particular, which they deemed emergency contraceptions, they call them abortifacients, which is a heated term. I'm not going to use it, but that's what they call them. And they argue that these 4 forms, like the Plan B and others, run afoul of religious liberty. So the first question, like under RFRA, is there a substantial burden, right? No one's making the Green family take the morning after pill. They're merely paying into a fund in which the money might be used by some employees, maybe not, to cover this sort of treatment. We addressed this earlier. Is that a burden? I think the Janus example is intriguing. I forget who mentioned it. I think Brittany and Carlo a minute ago. But I think it's an intriguing example because you're basically saying that it's a violation of my conscience rights to have to pay for what someone else might do. And generally, we say you pay taxes for lots of things you don't like, right? You all pay taxes. Those taxes will be used for God knows what, right? And you can't object to everything, right? There are cases on this, right? I don't want to pay taxes because I'm a pacifist, I'm a Quaker, and my taxes might be used to fund war machines. So the burden issue, I think the court glosses over it, but under at least modern precedents, and Janus, paying for something is itself some sort of endorsement of your conscience. The second issue, which I want to talk about, does RFRA even apply to Hobby Lobby? Right? JCL, calling you for this one, right? Why does Justice Alito so certain that the corporation Hobby Lobby can be protected by the Religious Freedom Restoration Act?
Whatever the Dictionary Act is, where
very good.
Defines to include a corporation.
Yeah, so that's the easy answer, right? 1 USC 1, right? The first page of the US Code. Actually, it's on the second page. I checked this morning. But basically, 1 USC, it's a long USC, right? 1 USC 1 says that if the word person is used in a statute, it includes corporation unless context indicates otherwise. And Ginsburg hits on this piece very hard. JC, what does Ginsburg say about this?
Ginsburg says that they can't be considered a person because it's kind of the same floodgate argument that was made in the previous case.
Right. Ginsburg takes the position that a for-profit corporation cannot be a person. Now, we've actually done a lot of cases involving corporations, right? Church of the Lukumi was a corporation. It wasn't Joe Smith, the priest, it was Church of the Lukumi. And Trinity Lutheran, it's also a corporation, right? Churches are incorporated under the laws of the state. So Ginsburg says, okay, fine. Religious nonprofits can be protected, but not religious for-profits. Kelly, how do you justify that line? Or is that a good line to draw? Religious nonprofits are protected, but religious for-profits, like Hobby Lobby, are outside.
I don't know how to draw it.
Well, why do you think the Ginsburg line is a good line? What are the problems with the Ginsburg line? Ryan?
I'm not sure you can really draw a line between.
Why not?
Both kind of further a religious.
We go back to Reynolds, right? If we're just talking about belief, okay, we're talking about conduct. Now, if you talk to the Greens, they will tell you that their store, Hobby Lobby, is basically an extension of their faith. That they close their store on Sundays, they provide religious counseling to their employees, they operate their business in a Christian manner. Now, maybe you agree the Little Sisters of the Poor should be exempted, but not Hobby Lobby. Now, funny story, they have the best framing. I love their frames. So if you ever come to my office, I have this huge thing on the wall. I got it framed at Hobby Lobby. including a letter from Justice Sotomayor. So I framed, and Ginsburg, I framed my Ginsburg and Sotomayor letters at Hobby Lobby, which I appreciate the irony. But where do we draw the line? Alito, I think, is just too simple. Dictionary Act, done, right? But it's a harder question about a for-profit corporation. Is it still exercising religion? Now, again, Sotomayor and Ginsburg didn't even think the daycare was exercising religion. That, I think, is a closer call, right? Is a daycare exercising religion? But as a craft store that sells frames and tchotchkes and different things, right? Is that exercising religion? Again, Ginsburg said it's a sincerely held belief which we're not challenging. This was the perfect plaintiff. The government was not willing to say that we think this is bogus, that a craft store is not exercising religion. They didn't want to go down that road. And I think once you accept the sincerity of their beliefs, you have to then accept that they're exercising religion also. I think the more forthright way of saying this is bogus, they're not actually being religious, but you have to challenge the Greens. This is a company that's owned by a trust. They're all members of the same family. They're the same religious beliefs. It's not publicly traded. And here's where the majority drew the line. They said closely held. They don't really define that, right? You guys say corporations yet? That can mean a lot of things, right? Closely held. And really, the court never had to come back to it. Alito made this point, which I think was correct. In all the years, the only sorts of laws that have given rise to these lawsuits are contraception mandates, right? They're still ongoing. Ginsburg had this parade of horribles about vaccinations and pills made out of pig products and what's the other one? Blood transfusions. We don't have instances where employers are trying to cut off coverage for these other items. It's only the contraceptive mandate. And we've been in this now for, 5 or 6 years. It hasn't really spread beyond that. So, okay, so we have the first issue, substantial burden. We have the second issue, is it even applying to the corporation? The court holds yes. So the third issue, right? Is this the least restrictive means, John? Is the contraceptive mandate as drafted the least restrictive means to accomplish the state's interest?
No.
Why do you say no?
Because wasn't there a whole bunch of other programs that could take over where this
Exactly, right? So RFRA asks, is this policy the least restrictive means to accomplish a compelling interest? The court sort of punts. They say, well, we'll assume providing birth control to female employees is compelling. They don't hold that. They assume it, because I think they would have lost Kennedy otherwise, right? I think they needed to say it to keep Kennedy on board. But they say this is not the least restrictive means. Why? The government has this accommodation, which they gave to the nonprofits, like the Little Sisters of the Poor. And because the accommodation works for the Little Sisters, give the same accommodation to Hobby Lobby. Everyone get that? The fact is, there's another way of doing it. Ginsburg says, no. This accommodation makes it not as easy, right? There's more work for females with this accommodation. Therefore, it frustrates the government's interest, right? But again, the language is the least restrictive means, not narrowly tailored, right? And you see the difference. Would the phrase narrowly tailored have a different result? I think so. But least restrictive means the only way. Is this the only way? No. Maybe the accommodation is narrowly tailored, but it's not the only way. So I think this would probably pass strict scrutiny, but it flunks RFRA. And you see how RFRA is actually more stringent than strict scrutiny. It's more stringent. And by the way, do you think they were happy with the accommodation? No, they weren't. There was an entire new round of litigation saying that the accommodation itself was burdensome. And to summarize briefly, the accommodation required these groups to actually certify and sign a document which allows the payment of insurance money. It's complicated. And they say that the signing of this document itself burden our religion, because as a consequence of us endorsing this document, we are complicit in the provision of birth control. So what happened then? After President Trump was elected, he said, fine, we'll just exempt everyone, right? The same exemption the houses of worships get are given to the nonprofits and the for-profits. And of course, courts found that the exemption was unlawful, that Trump can't exempt everyone. So this has been a complete cluster, dumpster fire, that's better. A complete dumpster fire for the last 6 years, right? This is never-ending litigation of the contraceptive mandate, something that's not even in the damn statute, which is where I keep harping on. I'll harp on until the end of time. I'll write another book on this eventually. Okay. So I've been teaching Obamacare now for 7 years. I keep having to write more stuff on it. All right. And so any questions on Hobby Lobby, on Trinity Lutheran, or on Lukumi? No? All right. I'll see you next week. Thank you. Right on time.